I pulled up in my battered 2012 Honda Civic, its paint chipped and engine humming like an old lawnmower, and slid it between two gleaming monsters, my cousin Lucas's blood-red Ferrari and my sister Victoria's brand-new Bentley. The driveway lights made their cars look like crowns on display, while mine looked like an insult parked beside them. Heads turned the second I stepped out. Their stares burned through me, smirks curling on their lips. They didn't have to say a word. I could already hear it. Poor Emily, the failure, the one who never belonged, and that night, they would pay for it. My name is Emily Parker, and I'm 32 years old. I was born into wealth, raised in the sunlit suburbs of San Diego, California. My father, Charles, built an empire in real estate. My mother, Evelyn, cared more about charity galas and magazine spreads than she ever did about me. My older sister, Victoria, was the family jewel, spoiled, adored, praised for every minor accomplishment. My cousin Lucas, the golden boy of Wall Street, was celebrated for every million he made, no matter how recklessly. And me? I was the afterthought, the girl in the background, the one they called the bargain girl, because I preferred simple clothes and drove the same car my father had handed down to me at 22, the very night he told me I was a disgrace for refusing to follow the family's path into law or banking. That was the night I left home, with nothing but my Civic and a second-hand laptop, determined to build something on my own. For the next 10 years, I worked in silence. I skipped dinners, skipped vacations, even skipped meals, pouring everything I had into my company, Parker Innovations. While they flaunted jewels and cars, I was negotiating contracts, writing code, and pitching investors in rooms where my last name meant nothing. I kept my face out of local magazines, using only my middle name, Grace, whenever the press came knocking. I made sure my family would never know what I was building. And yet, the truth was about to surface whether I liked it or not. That very morning, I had signed the final agreement to acquire Technova in a $4.7 billion deal, a move that would launch Parker Innovations into the global spotlight. Reporters were already preparing headlines with my name on them, my real name. So as I walked into that glittering dining room, chandeliers blazing overhead, Victoria was already bragging about her latest promotion. Lucas was boasting about his $70 million deal, and my parents were glowing with pride. My mother glanced at my plain dress, sighed, and said, "Emily is practical." The word dripped from her tongue like it was a disease. I sat down at that long mahogany table, my $2,000 bottle of wine tucked under my chair, and forced myself not to laugh. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I was still invisible. But the truth was a storm, and tonight it was coming straight for them. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. I truly want to know how far my story will travel across the world, and who out there might understand what it feels like to be erased by the very people meant to love you. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered. Chandeliers, dripping light, polished mahogany table stretching across the dining room, waiters gliding silently with trays of champagne. My mother's eyes narrowed at me, as if my very presence tarnished her perfect evening. "Emily," she said again, this time softer but sharper, "you really should consider upgrading that car. It's embarrassing for the family." Victoria leaned across the table, the diamonds on her wrist catching the candlelight. "I know a dealer who could get you a deal on a new Porsche. You'd look so much better, driving something that fits your last name." Her smile was the same one she'd used since childhood when she wanted to remind me of my place. Before I could respond, Lucas raised his glass, his grin wide and arrogant. Well, she probably couldn't afford the insurance, let alone the car. But hey, the bargain girl's always been practical. Laughter rippled around the table. Emma, ever eager to join in, covered her mouth and giggled. I sat back in my chair, folding my napkin across my lap with deliberate calm. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I had learned long ago that silence often unsettles them more than words. While they basked in their own reflections, Victoria praising herself for her promotion at Goldman Sachs, Lucas bragging about the $70 million hedge fund deal he just closed, I slid my phone under the table. The screen lit up with numbers I had been tracking all day. Parker Innovations, market cap, $4.7 billion. The ink on the acquisition papers was barely dry. Just hours earlier, I had signed the deal that would change everything. 10 years of grinding in the shadows, 10 years of being their afterthought, had built me an empire. I looked up and caught my mother's eyes. She was smiling politely, as if proud of herself for letting me sit at this table at all. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I sipped the wine she had swapped out. Pretending not to notice, she had hidden my expensive bottle on the kitchen counter. They thought I was the poor one. They thought my little Civic defined me. They thought my black dress was proof that I was small, invisible, unworthy. What they didn't know was that the woman they were mocking was already wealthier than all of them combined. I had been on international magazine covers, my name whispered in Silicon Valley boardrooms, my company's technology changing industries, and not one of them had noticed, because I never wanted them to. And yet, as I sat there in silence, I knew the evening wouldn't end the way they expected. Something had already shifted this morning. The storm was coming, and it was going to hit this table harder than they could possibly imagine. The dining room buzzed with a performance I had watched 1,000 times before. Victoria held court at the far end of the table, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's glow as she bragged about her new promotion at Goldman Sachs. She spoke like she had just conquered Wall Street itself, her voice carrying across the polished mahogany table. Lucas chimed in, smirking as he bragged about the Miami beachfront villa he had just bought. Ocean view, infinity pool, private chef, he boasted, as if he were narrating a commercial. My father beamed with pride, nodding along. My mother topped off Lucas's glass with champagne as though he were royalty. I sat quietly, folding my napkin, invisible once again. Then came the sting I had been waiting for. My mother looked at me with that practiced blend of pity and disdain. Well, at least Victoria lets you borrow her dresses, Emily. With your situation, I don't think you could afford one yourself. The laughter was sharp, bouncing around the table like shards of broken glass. I felt my stomach tighten, but instead of flinching, I smiled softly. I leaned back in my chair, eyes calm, voice low. My company's called Parker Innovations. For a moment, silence. Then Lucas let out a bark of laughter. Parker Innovations? Never heard of it. Probably one of those little startups that burns through money and collapses in 18 months. Victoria smirked and nodded, like she had just agreed with the punchline of a joke. I didn't argue. I had no need to. Instead, I slipped my phone out of my bag under the table. The screen glowed with the update I had been waiting for all day. Parker Innovations stock, up 20% after this morning's acquisition. The number stared back at me, a silent reminder that while they mocked me for my car and my dress, I was running circles around their so-called success. I pressed my lips together, willing myself not to reveal anything yet. Let them keep talking. Let them think I was still their charity case. As I looked up, my eyes met Victoria's. She was too busy sipping wine and flaunting her bracelet to notice the tremor of amusement in my smile. But someone else did. The young waiter, who had just placed a dish of lobster in front of me, froze. His eyes widened. He fumbled with the tray, nearly dropping it. "Excuse me, ma'am," he stammered, his voice rising just enough for the whole table to hear. "Aren't you Emily Parker from Forbes Tech Visionaries? I saw your face in the magazine last week." The room fell silent. Forks hovered mid-air. My sister's smirk faltered. My cousin's grin disappeared. My mother's hand froze on her glass, and in that heavy, breathless pause, I realized this was only the beginning. The silence after the waiter's slip was heavy, but it didn't last. Victoria leaned back in her chair with a sharp laugh, as if she had to shatter the tension before it swallowed her whole. Forbes Tech Visionaries? Oh, please, that must have been someone else with the same name. Emily Parker? Do you know how many Parkers there are in California? She probably just looks like her. Lucas smirked again, though it didn't reach his eyes this time. Yeah, I mean, come on. Emily? Running a billion-dollar company? Be serious. Her so-called startup probably couldn't buy a one-bedroom condo downtown. It's a miracle that old Civic of hers still runs. My father cleared his throat, eager to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Anyway," he said, tapping his wine glass for attention, "I had lunch with a senator last week. We're looking at expanding our real estate holdings into Texas. Big opportunities there." He puffed up his chest as if the entire room had been waiting to hear his business moves. My mother gave a relieved smile and nodded along, but her eyes kept darting toward me, as though she wasn't entirely sure what to believe. I stayed silent, my hands resting calmly on the linen napkin in my lap. On the outside, I was the same Emily they had always dismissed, but inside, a storm was building, a mix of anger and a decade's worth of quiet resolve. My mind drifted back to that night when I was 22. My birthday. I had come home with a stack of plans, sketches, and ideas. I wanted my father to see my vision for a tech company that could change the way businesses handled data. I can still hear his voice, low and sharp. "Emily, you're a burden. You'll never make it on your own. You should stop embarrassing this family." He had shoved the car keys into my palm and told me to leave. That was the night I drove away in the Civic. My heart shattered, but my determination sealed. I blinked, returning to the present. The same man who had called me useless now bragged about his influence. The same sister who had laughed as I carried my boxes out of that house was sitting across from me, pretending she was royalty. I reached slowly into my bag. My fingers brushed against leather, paper, and the cold metal of my phone. I pulled out a neat folder, thick with documents, and placed it on the glossy table between the wine glasses and the silverware. "What's that?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with curiosity. I didn't answer. I simply slid the folder toward the center of the table. The Parker crest, stamped in faded ink on the corner, caught Lucas's eye. He reached for it, flipping it open. His smile vanished. These are the mortgage papers," he muttered, scanning the pages. This is the house." The room shifted again. Eyes widened. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her diamond rings glinting under the chandelier. My father leaned forward, his face draining of color. They looked at me, searching for an explanation. But I stayed silent, my expression calm, my eyes unreadable, and that silence was louder than any words. What they didn't know was that the documents they were staring at were only the first crack in the perfect image they had built. The rest of the truth was still waiting, and it would tear their world apart. My phone buzzed against the table, its vibration slicing through the stiff silence that had settled after I dropped the mortgage papers in front of them. I glanced at the screen. Sarah, my assistant. She knew better than to interrupt me unless it was urgent, which meant this was exactly the moment I had been waiting for. I stood, sliding my chair back with a calmness that only made them more restless. "Excuse me," I said, my voice polite but firm. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Emily, it's rude to take calls at dinner." I ignored her. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. Sarah's voice came through, quick and professional. "Miss Parker, sorry to disturb you. The Gulfstream G700 is ready, but the maintenance team in New York needs your approval to finalize the upgrades before your Tokyo flight next week. Also, the board is asking if you'll confirm attendance at the press conference about the $6.3 billion Technova deal." I caught Victoria leaning in, trying to overhear. I smiled to myself and switched to speaker. "Yes, Sarah," I said evenly, my voice echoing across the dining table. "Tell the pilot to file the flight plan with a Tokyo stopover, then on to New York. I'll head to the hangar once we're done here." The entire table froze. Forks stopped midair. Lucas's jaw hung slack, and even Victoria's carefully trained smile cracked for the first time that night. She leaned toward him and whispered, not nearly quiet enough, "She's exaggerating. It has to be the company's jet. There's no way she owns one." I let the words hang, watching their faces twist between disbelief and irritation. My mother's hand shook slightly as she set her glass back on the table. My father's eyes narrowed, studying me, like I was some puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then, suddenly, he slammed his hand against the table so hard the plates rattled. "Enough lies," he roared, his voice thundering through the room. "I forbid you from humiliating this family with your fantasies. Do you hear me, Emily? You will not drag the Parker name through the mud with these ridiculous stories about jets and billion-dollar companies." The wait staff froze in place, staring at us with wide eyes. Victoria pressed a napkin to her wine-stained dress, pretending to be amused, but her hands betrayed her, trembling as she dabbed at the fabric. Lucas glared at me, though his forced smirk had vanished. Emma sat stiff, her phone clutched tightly, her thumbs flying as though she couldn't Google fast enough to prove me wrong. I met my father's furious eyes and simply tilted my head, my calmness cutting sharper than his anger ever could. My silence was a weapon, and I was ready to use it, because what none of them realized was that the ground beneath them was already starting to crack. I could still hear the echo of my father's fist slamming against the table when I slowly reached for my phone again. My hands weren't shaking, though everyone else's seemed to be. I unlocked the screen with a calmness that almost frightened even me, then turned the display toward them. On the glowing glass, the headline shone clear as crystal. "Parker Innovations acquires Technova in landmark $6.3 billion deal. CEO Emily Parker steps into the spotlight." My name, my face, right there on the front page of Bloomberg's business section. Victoria gasped, and the wine glass slipped from her manicured fingers, crashing against her plate and spilling deep red liquid across her silk dress. She didn't even notice. Lucas snatched my phone like a lifeline, his eyes scanning the article in disbelief. "No, this can't be right. This says you're worth billions, that you're on the cover of Forbes. That can't be you." His voice cracked on the last word. "Oh my God," whispered Emma, frantically scrolling her own phone now. "She's telling the truth. Look, It's all here. Forbes, CNBC, Parker Innovations. She's everywhere. My mother's fork was frozen, in midair. For once, she wasn't orchestrating anything. She was pale, trembling, caught between outrage and fear. Emily, why didn't you tell us? I took a slow sip from my glass, savoring the silence that wrapped around the table like a heavy curtain. Then I set it down and looked directly at her. Would it have mattered? 10 years ago, you all told me I was a disappointment. You never asked what I was doing, never cared enough to listen. You were too busy clapping for Victoria's promotions and Lucas's deals. I kept driving this car because it was the last gift Dad ever gave me before he told me to leave. It reminds me of who I used to be before I realized I'd have to build my own family out in the world. I paused and glanced at the crumpled mortgage papers lying in the middle of the table. You assumed I was poor. You assumed wrong. Every laugh, every insult, every time you called me practical like it was a disease, I carried it with me, and I turned it into fuel. For the first time in years, my father looked unsettled. His hands, once so steady when signing million-dollar deals, trembled as he reached for his glass. He didn't drink. He just stared at me, his jaw tight. Finally, his voice cracked, not with anger this time, but with something else, something I had never heard from him before. Fear. Emily, he said, I need your help. My company, Parker Realty, it's in trouble. We owe the bank $5 million. The market turned against us. I was going to ask Lucas for support, but if what you're saying is true, if you really have that kind of money. His voice trailed off. He looked at me, not as a father looks at a daughter, but as a desperate man looks at a potential investor. Please, you could save everything we've built. The irony cut so deep, I almost laughed. 10 years ago, this man looked me in the eye and said, "You're a burden. I'd rather lose everything than take a dime from you." Those words had been my fuel, the fire under my every sleepless night, every deal I fought tooth and nail to close. Now, here he was, begging. I placed my hands on the table and leaned forward, just enough so he could see the steel in my eyes. "Dad," I said quietly, "you once told me you'd rather lose everything than take money from me. So tonight, I'm just honoring your words." The shock that spread across his face was almost painful to watch. Victoria froze, with her mouth half open, as if waiting for me to laugh and take it back. Lucas muttered a curse under his breath. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she could hold the house together with sheer will. Inside me, a storm was raging, part triumph, part sorrow. A piece of me wanted to reach out, to save them from the ruin they had brought upon themselves. But another part of me remembered the hollow birthday night when I drove away in tears, clutching the Civic's wheel like it was my only lifeline. I took a breath, leaned back in my chair, and smiled faintly. I didn't need to yell. My silence had already spoken louder than any scream could. And just when I thought the night couldn't unravel further, I felt another vibration from my phone. This time, it wasn't Sarah. It was a message from someone else, someone they all knew, someone they never expected to hear from again. The silence after my father's outburst clung to the walls like smoke that refused to clear. No one reached for their glasses. No one dared to chew. You could almost hear the chandelier buzzing above us. I stayed seated, calm, letting them squirm in the weight of the truth they had just been forced to swallow. Victoria was the first to break. Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, came out in a fragile sweetness that I hadn't heard since we were children. "Emily," she said, blinking quickly as if she might cry, "I've been Thinking about leaving Goldman Sachs. I've been so tired, and I always admired how you chased your dreams. Maybe I could come work for you. I'd be a great asset to Parker Innovations. I set down my fork, folding my hands neatly in front of me, and looked straight at her. Work for me? You mean the little startup you laughed at an hour ago? The one you said would be gone in 18 months? Her cheeks flushed pink, but she kept her smile frozen in place. I didn't mean it like that. You know I get carried away sometimes. We're sisters, Emily. We should be building our futures together. Don't you think? I leaned back, tilting my head just slightly. We don't hire people who only care about status, Victoria. You wear brands like their battle armor, but you've never built anything on your own. My company isn't a stage for you to keep performing. Victoria's smile broke. Her lips trembled as she stared at me, unable to find a retort. That's when Emma, never one to miss an opportunity, leaned forward. Emily, sweetie, you know I've always been supportive. I've been following your work for years. Well, when I could. And I've been thinking about investing in tech. Maybe we could collaborate. I could bring in some of my network. You know, make introductions. I raised an eyebrow. My patience, paper thin. That's interesting, Emma. Tell me. Name one programming language. She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted around, searching the room for an answer. But the only thing she could manage was a weak laugh. Well, I don't need to know coding to be valuable, do I? Lucas snorted. She doesn't even know what Java is. This is embarrassing. He was pale, though, and I could see him refreshing Bloomberg on his phone, as if the article would suddenly disappear. My mother suddenly slammed her napkin down, her voice trembling with desperation. Stop this, all of you. Emily, listen to me. We're family. Whatever has happened, we can fix it. You don't have to stand against us. We're blood. We should be united. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time in my life, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman, terrified of losing everything. I pushed my chair back, the sound screeching against the polished floor. Slowly, I reached into my bag again and pulled out the folder I had placed on the table earlier. My fingers lingered on the edge as I stood. You've been wondering what this is, I said softly, my voice steady and cold. I never told you because I didn't think you deserved to know. But since you all seem so interested in what I can and can't afford, I slid the folder across the table once more. Lucas, still clutching his phone, reluctantly opened it again. His eyes widened, scanning the pages, his lips moving as he read. Then he froze. Wait, he whispered. This is the mortgage agreement. He looked around the table, his face drained of color. This is this house. Dad, this is the loan you took out, isn't it? My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. My mother gasped, clutching the pearls at her neck. Victoria leaned over, snatching the papers, reading with wide eyes. Sold to Parker Real Estate? She whispered. Her head shot up. Emily, no, tell me this isn't what I think it is. I stood tall, my voice calm and cutting through the tension like a blade. I never told you. This house? The bank repossessed it last month. And the company that bought it. Parker Real Estate? That's mine. You're not sitting in your mansion tonight. You're sitting in a house you now rent from me for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. My father's chair scraped back violently, his face contorted with rage. You went behind my back. You humiliated me in my own home. I looked at him, unflinching. No, Dad, you humiliated yourself. I just collected the pieces. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her diamond bracelet trembling. Emma whispered, "She owns the house? We're tenants?" Their perfect world had cracked once. Now it was crumbling, and I hadn't even told them everything. Because the real secret, the one that would finally end this performance, was still waiting, and they had no idea how much further I was willing to go. I stood there, watching the panic ripple across the table like a crack spreading through glass. My father's face flushed red, his fists clenched. Victoria's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, and my mother's lips trembled as she whispered excuses no one believed. For a moment, I felt the little girl inside me begging for their approval again, aching for them to finally see me as worthy. But then I remembered every Christmas where I was treated like the help, every birthday ignored, every cruel nickname they threw at me. I pushed my chair back, the legs screeching against the polished wood. "This dinner has been illuminating," I said, my voice calm, steady, almost gentle. "But I have a company to run, and unlike this family, my work doesn't run on lies." My mother reached out, tears streaking her mascara. "Emily, wait, please. We can start over. We're family." I paused, looking down at her trembling hand. "Family?" I asked softly. "Family doesn't laugh at you when you're struggling. Family doesn't call you a burden and throw you out on your birthday. Family doesn't only show up when they need money." Her lips parted, but no words came. My father stood there, silent now, his pride shattered. Victoria sat frozen, the mortgage papers still in her lap like a bomb she hadn't figured out how to defuse. Lucas's phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the table, but he didn't even notice. I gathered my things, slipping the phone and the folder back into my bag. My black Nordstrom dress whispered against the floor as I moved toward the door. Behind me, the voices started again. Pleas, accusations, the desperate clatter of a dynasty realizing it had been living in a house that no longer belonged to them. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp. My little Civic was waiting faithfully in the driveway, tucked between the Ferrari and the Bentley like it always had been. But across the street, under the glow of the streetlight, sat a sleek Aston Martin, engine purring softly. Behind the wheel was Daniel, my boyfriend, the quiet engineer whose own tech ventures had made him worth more than $200 million. He raised a hand when he saw me. I smiled at him, then turned back toward my Civic. I slid into the driver's seat, ran my fingers across the worn steering wheel, and started the engine. The car hummed like it always had, steady and reliable, carrying me through the darkest years of my life. I could have stepped into the luxury sports car across the street, but tonight, I wanted my family to see me drive away in the same old car they loved to mock. Not because I needed it, but because I no longer needed their approval. Over my shoulder, I caught sight of my mother stumbling onto the driveway, calling after me, her voice cracked, desperate. "Emily, please, we can fix this. We can fix us. Don't do this." I didn't stop. I didn't look back again. I drove away, the mansion shrinking in my rearview mirror, their chaos fading behind me. Weeks later, the emails began. Then the texts. "Emily, darling, let's do lunch." "Jules, I've got investment ideas. Call me." "Remember all the good times?" "We're family. Don't shut us out." I read them all. Then I forwarded each one to Sarah with a single instruction: add to the blocked list. In New York City, I stood in the gleaming new headquarters of Parker Innovations, a $7 billion expansion that had the press buzzing. Reporters called me the billionaire who chose humility. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched toward me, and I told them the truth. Success isn't about what you wear or what you drive. It's about what you build and who stands by you while you build it. That night, as I sat in my quiet apartment overlooking the city, I opened my desk drawer. Inside was the key to my old Civic, resting next to a framed picture of me and Daniel, smiling in the California sun. I traced the edges of the photo and felt peace settle in my chest. Because in the end, true family isn't measured in bloodlines or wealth. It's measured in love, in respect, in who shows up when the world walks out. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't screaming or paying back old debts or even owning the house they once used to shame you. Sometimes the best revenge is building a life so full of love, peace, and purpose that their betrayal can never touch you again. When the people who once mocked you beg for your attention, would you forgive them or let them live with the silence they created?